All right, as with anything at CCC, we're going to start with a prayer. I want you to listen to the words of the prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Lord, I offer you today all of my joys, my victories, and my accomplishments. Please remind me that all my talents and abilities are gifts from you. Apart from you, I can do nothing, but with you, all things are possible. Lord, I give you as well all the crosses I have to bear, all the trials, the heartaches, and the anxieties that are part of my daily life. Just as you won victory through your cross, with you, I will conquer the problems and hurdle the obstacles that come my way today. With the help of the Virgin Mary prayers, may I be kind, generous, and forgiving to everyone I meet today. Amen. Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. That was the prayer that I heard every morning in my 4 years here at CCC. We did the same prayer every day, the entire time, and I've never forgotten it. I still prayed in times of stress and struggle and on a daily basis. That and the Serenity Prayer. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. When I was asked to give this talk, my first reaction was to make it like the graduation speeches. Good for you. CCC is awesome. Every student who graduates here can become me. You are the smartest and the best. And that's what we hear on graduation day. I'm a perfect shining example of that message to you, right? You tell a few success stories, you brag about your great accomplishments while feigning humility. The teachers that knew you and had you are puffing up their chests because their success is your success. The problem is I'm not entirely convinced that those speeches have the impact that they were intended to have. So instead, today, I come to you after hearing that long resume of all these great things to tell you about my journey and my imperfections. More of the trials, heartaches, anxiety part of that prayer than the victories and accomplishments, although both are part of this message. Who you are today, sitting in these chairs, does not define who you are going to be tomorrow. But what you learn here today, what you feel as you come to this school, and what you experience here are going to shape who you are forever. Before coming to CCC, I went to a little school on the beach called Cottingham Elementary. It's on Indian Rocks Beach. It's still there. And you see, my father, who you now know is a teacher, was a teacher over at Cottingham. In fact, I had him for all of 5th grade. And then they opened a middle school, and I had him for 6th, 7th, and 8th grades as well, with the exception of not for art, music, science, or French. Now, the good thing about it is that I became very close to my dad. He knew if I did my homework, and he knew that if I forgot it at home, I could turn it in after school. I had instant access to help at any given time. Home tutoring sounds great, right? But it also means that your parent sees every mistake that you make, not only at home, but at school. Every quiz question you answer wrong, every homework assignment you blew, and every classroom discussion where you missed the point. And for better or worse, I quickly became a perfectionist, and I remained one for the next 11, 12 years of my life. Now, a perfectionist is someone who strives to be perfect, but for the wrong reason. They're seeking approval and achievement. And in my case, I was seeking the approval of my parents, but I was also seeking the approval of my classmates, because I didn't want to be known as just the child of the teacher or the teacher's pet. Even though I admired him tremendously, that's not who I wanted to be. And so I'll come back to being a perfectionist. There were a total of 12 kids in my 8th grade class, and as you might suspect, I was the only student from Cottingham who came to CCC afterwards. I was not in the St. Cecilia's crowd. I was not in the St. Paul's crowd. I didn't know any of them coming into here, and I didn't bring with me this cadre of friends. And so for those of you who are in the audience who were like me, you know how uncomfortable it can be to arrive at this school. High school, more than any other time in your life, is when the extroverts, the people who can quickly read a situation, morph to fit in, excel and find happiness. And my husband's one of those. He is chameleon on the spot, and he found his friends in high school. He had that 8 to 10 group of friends, and to this very day, 40 years later, they get together every year and have fun together. But I wasn't one of those people. In fact, I was really an introvert. I'm generally quiet, and I'm not interested in being involved in gossip or drama, and so like many of you who are here today, I had trouble finding my identity in high school, if for no other reason than to know who to sit with at lunchtime. And you know what I'm talking about if you're one of those people. I wasn't a socialite. I wasn't part of the popular crowd here. I never ran for student government or student office. I was never nominated for homecoming court, and I was rarely invited to after-game parties. But that's okay, because it's just not who I was. So I tried hanging out with the really smart people around here. You'd think from everything you heard I was one of those really smart people. And although I was smart, I was at the bottom of the smart people. In fact, although I took AP classes and I was in the National Honor Society, I was never in the top of the class here. I just barely made A's. I never won a single academic award or scholarship here. I only had 2 final grade B's on my report card, though. And one of them was my AP English senior year. I got a 3 on the exam, but more damaging was we had to write a story of fiction, and I am not a fiction writer. I cannot make up an untrue story to save my life. And Mrs. Figueroa gave me a D on that writing assignment, and that's exactly what I earned, and it led to a B in the class. It all but ensured that I would take as few English and writing classes in my college and in my career as possible. The second was from none other than Debbie Stubner. Miss Stubner I had for government and economics. The government part was okay. I got that. But the economics, I never really got that. Money was just not my thing. She tried her best. I simply never could get a hold of the whole bear and the bull market stuff. I got a B in the class, and it's exactly what I earned. And similarly, I managed to then graduate from college without ever having to take economics again. Fortunately, I married a guy who's an MBA, and he takes very good care of my paycheck now. Teachers, however, generally like me very much because in that perfectionism, I worked hard. I towed the line. I earnestly wanted to please and do a good job. But I still wasn't really part of the smart people crowd here. I briefly thought about being one of the athletes here, maybe basketball or track or cross country. And growing up, I'd been a baton twirler, which nowadays you don't see too much, but this was the 80s. There were a lot of baton twirlers around. In fact, I was a really good one. In 8th grade, I already had several state championships, and right before I started here at CCC, I went to the World Championships, and I placed in the top 10 in the world in baton twirling. But being a good baton twirler does not translate into being good at other sports. See, batons are long and skinny sticks, and I can throw it in the air and flip up and down and spin in any direction, and 99 out of 100 times I'm going to catch it. But balls are round, they are a different shape, and they hit me in the face. Not a good mix. So athlete was out. We didn't have a majorette line. We did have a marching band, about 75 strong, and they had a color guard where you spun flags and sometimes rifles, and I joined the color guard in the hopes that someday the band director would actually let me twirl on the field, and fortunately he did. Sometimes this is one of those things where ask forgiveness instead of permission. So, you know, there's the senior game, and you guys probably just did it on the football field. And so I was a senior, and it was senior game, and it was the senior day, and it was the last home game. And I was a baton twirler, and he was letting me twirl. And I did 3 batons in the routine. And what I didn't tell him is that for senior day, I had arranged for 3 fire batons. So on the sidelines, I secretly had all the kerosene in there, and I lit up 3 fire batons and did my routine with fire instead of regular sticks. It was very popular, but I did get in a little bit of trouble afterwards. Anyway, but with the band, I found my crowd. I didn't play an instrument, but at least Even though it was an imperfect fit, I knew where to sit at the lunch table. I sat with the band. I never learned to play an instrument, and in college we didn't have a marching band, so my identity here was a temporary identity, an imperfect fit. But being in the band didn't define who I was going to be in the future. It just gave me that circle of friends with whom I could grow as a person. It gave me experiences to have fun with, to feel a sense of belonging, and that's an important thing to do here in high school. You have to put in a little effort. It took me a while to find my group. It felt awkward. Why should I have to go out and do this? But you gotta do it. You gotta get that circle of friends, circle of people that you can learn from, that you can talk to, and even if you don't want to talk to them, that you can listen to and learn from. We don't have enough time in life to make every mistake there is, so you gotta watch what other people do and see the mistakes that they make and learn from them so you don't have to keep doing it yourself. An imperfect group of friends helps you practice being a person, figure out what you do well, learn your imperfections in others, and learn them in yourself. Who you are today doesn't define who you will be tomorrow. But what you learn and what you feel and what you experience now in high school will shape you forever. When I was a student at CCC, I was a little vague about what I wanted to be when I grew up. Part of me wanted to be a teacher. My dad was the teacher. In fact, by the time I was a senior here, my dad had moved from Cottingham to here, and I had him again as a senior for senior religion. He taught world history as well, and later taught American history and speech and debate. He was this outgoing, dynamic, larger-than-life teacher that everybody loved. He was voted the most popular teacher the very first year that he was here, and he was known for doing crazy stunts like climbing up on the tables in the cafeteria during lunch and dancing to music with students. He'd do any kind of crazy stunt for attention. He was the graduation speaker twice in his 19 years here. So it's not terribly surprising that this perfectionist daughter who admired her father thought being a teacher was a really big draw. But the other part of me wanted to be in medicine. I'd had knee surgery for a torn ACL as a freshman, and I had to go to physical therapy for several days a week for months, and my mom thought I should be a physical therapist. And mentally, I was more inclined to be a doctor, but this was 30 years ago. Only about 2% of physicians were women, and they were largely pediatricians, and only about 10% of most medical school classes at that time were women. It was 90% guys. So it was a little uppity to be an introvert female and say you wanted to be a doctor. And so I usually answered pre-med or teacher, and then left the rest to people's imagination. When I graduated from Central, I went on to Columbia College, and college is a great time for everyone to pick a new skin, a new identity, or wear a different face, and I love that. 1 month after arrival on campus, I was elected president of my class, despite never having served on student council in high school. I majored in chemistry and minored in math, and I lived in campus the entire time. I ran for student government president as a senior, and I lost by 6 votes. But I was still a big fish in that little pond, and I was very happy there. Choose a college or university that can make you happy, that can help you succeed. I've gone on to have the career I had from a small liberal arts college in South Carolina. You can do anything if you're put in an environment where you can grow and thrive. So those of you that are seniors, my daughter is a senior, choose a place that you like, that you know that you're gonna do well and you're gonna grow with. Don't choose it for its name or its reputation or someone else. Choose it for you because it's your identity that you need to create there. For some reason, allowing you to choose your own classes actually made a huge difference to me academically. I never made a B in college, although I came close a few times with Spanish 2. Spanish 2 was much harder than Calculus 4. Take differential equations any day. But I did graduate, and I graduated as valedictorian, and I did it in 3 years because of all those AP credits I had when I left here. In my last 2 years of college, I actually worked from 7:30 in the morning till 1 o'clock each day, and I took all my classes in the afternoon and at night school because I actually got a job as a teacher. You see, at the time in South Carolina, there was such a shortage of teachers in math and science that the kids would sit in the class with a monitor, and there was literally no one to teach the class. So they put in this temporary measure that if you had completed at least 2 years of college, your associate's degree, and you were majoring in a math, a science, or education, you could actually be hired to teach with a fully licensed certified teacher overseeing you. And so for my last 2 years of college, I taught math and science every Monday through Friday while finishing my degree. Perfect, right? Sort of. I learned a lot about teaching. I learned a lot about myself. I was great with the content. I knew it hands down. But I was not great with the delivery, and I was not very good at classroom control, especially at the beginning. And by a year being into a teacher, I knew that I did not want to do this for the rest of my life. And so I went back to that pre-medical track with aspirations of being a doctor. My perfect job in my perfect university was completely imperfect, and I needed to change course. And so I did. And then I applied to medical school. I got into 3 different ones, and I elected to come back here to Tampa Bay to attend USF, in part because my father had now had 2 heart attacks, and I wanted to be close to home. I actually started dating someone who I had met here at CCC. We were in the band together. We dated for 3 years of my medical school. And I came back frequently to see my dad, who was still teaching here, and some of the other teachers. Gabrielle Noy's brother, Dan Noyes, was my chemistry teacher, and he let me come back and teach his class a few times. And Coach Gasper was still teaching, and he invited me into the biology lab, and we dissected frogs and talked to the students a few times. And I actually felt more comfortable coming back to CCC after college than I did on some of the days when I was here as a student. It wasn't that the school had changed, it was that I had changed. I'd found my voice, I'd found my footing. I found my identity by being in medical school. The insecurities that I felt when I was sitting in your seats had faded, and I could embrace the good things about having been here in high school much more strongly than I had sometimes when I was here. If I'd never come back, I wouldn't have known that connection existed, and I probably wouldn't be standing on this stage talking to you today. So no matter how good or bad or insecure or uncomfortable you sometimes feel in high school, after you leave here, grow a little, change a little, but then circle back for a visit. You might be surprised at how much you miss this place. In your senior year of medical school, you have to decide what kind of physician you really want to be. And when I started medical school, I said I wanted to be anything but a surgeon. You see, surgeons are well known for having terrible lifestyles, in that we get woken up in the middle of the night for emergencies. We're operating at 1 o'clock in the morning when we should be sleeping, and we work 80 or more hours a week on average. In addition, this is 1991, and there aren't very many women surgeons. In fact, I didn't meet but a single woman surgeon through all of medical school, and then only one in my residency as well. Surgery is a guy's field. There was lots of bravado, bragging, off-color jokes make up the surgical culture. Most women who were in surgery didn't marry. You didn't have kids because you were married to your career. And those who were women in surgery were largely breast surgeons. And I had no interest in being a breast surgery, and I was determined to be married and have kids. So I went into medical school thinking I was going to be a pediatrician like most of the women in medicine were. And that's all well and good until the very first day I stepped into an operating room, and it was magic. I can remember it to the day. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. I was a third-year medical student, and this guy had been hit by a car. He had this atrocious fracture of his lower leg where the bumper had hit his leg, and it was shattered into a million pieces. And we washed it out, and we put what's called an external fixator on there. It's like a erector set for the leg, and we pinned all these pieces into place and lined the bone up, and it was awesome. It was so fun. It was so rewarding. I walked out of there with this natural high. And then the next morning, I got woken up at 1 o'clock in the morning for a ruptured aorta, a big blood vessel in the belly. It's swollen up and it's leaking. And we go in the belly, and there's all the parts, and it was just the coolest thing in the world. We put this little piece of Gore-Tex tube in there to replace it, and it works. You're like, wow, this is awesome. And at that point, I knew I was going to have to be a surgeon for the rest of my life. It didn't matter that the guys didn't want me there. It didn't matter that it was taboo to be married and have kids. It was this completely imperfect field that didn't want women to be part of it, and it was exactly what I wanted, and I was going to have it. And I had to learn how to fit in. I started learning the sports teams. I knew nothing about sports ahead of time, but darn it, I pulled out that newspaper and every day I read the rankings and the scores, and it was just as important as preparing for the operation because I could go in there and tell them who won the game the day before, and they liked me for it. Adapt and overcome. In your fourth year of med school, you enter a process called the match. It's this computer-based system where you as a student make a list of all the hospitals that you would like to train at, and each hospital makes a list of what students they want there as a resident later on, and it goes into this computer algorithm, and on match day in March of each year, that spits out a little piece of paper, and it tells you where you're going to spend the next 5 or so years of your life. You are contractually bound to accept what is on that piece of paper, and the institution is contractually bound to hire you based on that. And lo and behold, I went into this match system and I matched to Massachusetts General Hospital, which is Harvard University's teaching hospital. It was by far the best surgery residency in the entire country. And here I am coming from CCC, Columbia College, and USF, and I am going to Harvard University. Holy cow. I don't know who was more surprised, me or them. The residency was filled with Ivy League graduates. In fact, half of the residency was filled with what we called Preparation H. Harvard undergrad, Harvard med school, Harvard residency. And somehow the match system was sending me there, and I was nervous. I took it as proof that God actually had a sense of humor, and I packed up my life and I moved to Boston. But just as I found my place to fit here in the cafeteria at CCC, I quickly found my place to fit in at Mass General, despite feeling entirely imperfect and inadequate in my knowledge and experience compared to those around me. What I hadn't anticipated was quite how physically and emotionally demanding surgery would be. I did live directly across the street from the hospital, and most days we arrived at work at 4:30 in the morning. And we went home at 11 o'clock at night, except that we took call every other night, so you were up all night in the hospital every other night, so you spent 5 hours at home every other day. And it was exhausting. I was afraid of killing someone at any living moment because I was so tired, but I loved every minute of being in the operating room and learning and fixing. I loved being surrounded by the best and the brightest, and the expectations were high, and you always felt it. But I prayed that Serenity Prayer and that prayer from CCC a lot, and it got me through a lot of difficult days. There's an American Indian story about cows and buffaloes where they advise you to be the buffalo. And it seems the story is based on the fact that when you're in the West, storms form very predictably. They form quickly. They move briskly from west to east. They have drenching rain and lightning, and then they're gone. They happen. It's almost like the 3 o'clock rain here. But when there's a storm out in the west, out on the prairies, the cows see the storm coming, and they run away from it. They try and head east as quickly as possible, hoping that they're going to outrun the storm. But cows are pretty slow, so the storm eventually catches them. But because they're moving with it, they're in it for a long time. The buffaloes do the opposite. When they see the storm coming, they turn horns directly into the storm, and they charge through the storm, right through the lightning, right through the rain, as quickly as possible, because they know there's sunshine on the other side. In residency, I had to be the buffalo. I had to have courage. I had to charge right through those tough rotations and attendings and all the questions about being a female, because I knew on the other side of the storm was going to be a great life as a surgeon. There was going to be sunshine on the other side. You could hurt me, but you couldn't stop the clock. Not everyone took the same approach to that in residency, and about 20% of my fellow residents had left the program 3 years into it. And one of my fellow residents committed suicide 6 months before graduating the 5 years of training because he couldn't achieve his own predetermined level of perfection. You see, perfectionism actually hinders your success. It's a pathway to depression, anxiety about not being perfect, addiction when you try and cover up that feeling of anxiety, paralysis in making decisions out of fear of making the wrong ones. We fear not putting anything we produce out to the world that could be imperfect. You have trouble sleeping from a deep fear of failing or making mistakes or disappointing others. Your self-worth is on the line with each of your major life challenges. My friend viewed his imperfection as a fatal flaw, something to be shamed, hidden, something that devalued him as a person. And he finally couldn't take it anymore and killed himself. But instead, we need to recognize our imperfections as a gift, a motivator to keep working on yourself, a driver to grow and develop. We have to ask God to use those imperfections to mold us and change us and show the world how imperfect people can do great and wondrous things, like being a surgeon, like saving lives. Doesn't mean it's easy, but it's necessary. I'm now 47 years old. I've completed 16 years of training after high school. So in addition to 5 years of general surgery, 2 years of pediatric surgery, 2 years of fetal surgery, and I've been a full-fledged practicing pediatric surgeon for over 13 years. There are only about 800 pediatric surgeons in the entire country. They could fit into this auditorium fairly easily. It's an elite field. I spend my days working and dealing with the gift of imperfection, both figuratively and literally, all day. You see, the vast majority of my patients are born with congenital birth defects. They are born anatomically imperfect in one way or another. And my job is to fashion their imperfection into something whole and beautiful and functional to the best of my ability. Birth defects come along a spectrum. Some are mild and easy to fix, non-life-threatening. Others are catastrophic, unsurvivable, and even with the best technology and surgery has to offer, they don't survive. Some respond to rerouting, kind of like plumbing. Disconnect this, reconnect it to somewhere else so that things can go around. Others require replacements, like kidney or liver transplants. But God has put me in a fairly challenging world. When a new mother and father are overjoyed at the birth of their child that they've anxiously anticipated for 9 months, I'm the one who often has to sit them down and explain that there's a problem, a big problem. The perfect child that they hope for isn't perfect. And if I'm lucky, and they're lucky, and it's God's will, it's a problem I can fix. But not always. Sometimes I'm the one who has to sit and hold their hands and tell them this child will be an angel in heaven sooner rather than later. It's a fatal imperfection. And it takes every ounce of strength from the Almighty above to get through those conversations. Half the time I cry, but I have to be the buffalo. I have to take on that difficult conversation with grace and composure. It takes strength of faith, the faith that you're learning here in school, the knowledge of the ethics that you get in senior religion, the belief that there's something in this horrible situation that's part of a masterful plan that's bigger than I could possibly understand, to walk into a room with those families and be the bearer of big news and bad news. And yet I love my job. Believe it or not, the cases where the child is not going to survive aren't actually nearly as hard as the ones that are right on the brink. They may survive, they may not. There are heroic things that we can try. I might operate 3 or 4 or 5 times to slowly morph this imperfect body into something that I hope will function for a lifetime. One of my most memorable patients is a child named Sophia. And Sophia was born at 23 weeks gestation, more than 4 months early and barely on the margins of survival. She was born with a birth defect called gastroschisis, where the belly wall next to the belly button didn't finish forming, and so the intestines are sticking out the hole. But as soon as she was born, she became critically ill. And at the bedside, I did a little procedure to tuck them back in and just tape over the top, because she was just too sick to even take to an operating room and formally fix the problem. She was on a ventilator, a breathing machine doing the work of breathing on the highest possible settings to try and get oxygen into this little baby. She was on fluids and blood pressure medicines just to try and get her blood to circulate because her heart wasn't functioning well. And despite it, she had this very unhealthy blue-gray color. But she was a fighter. She would kick and grimace and try and yell at you every time you touched her, even though she was gray. And over the next few days, things got worse. She developed bleeds into her head, which is a common problem for pediatric infants. Their blood vessels are just too fragile for outside stimulation. She developed pressure in her head. She ruptured her lungs. She had tubes everywhere. And then the intestines I'd put back in began to swell because of all the fluid she was getting. And they started to die from being in the pressure of this closed space. Her chances of survival were less than 10% at best. Could I operate? Yeah, I could operate, reopen the belly, have a neurosurgeon put the tube in the head for the pressure. I could drain the lungs. But when do you stop? When do you have this conversation with the family? When do you say we should try this versus not try it? When are you doing something for them versus just to them? How do you manage the hope of the family? To top it off, she was born to undocumented Mexican parents who didn't speak English, didn't have health insurance, and didn't have transportation to come to the hospital more than once a week. But they were people of great faith. They had no children, and they'd been trying to have a child for more than 10 years. They'd had 5 prior miscarriages, and this is the first baby that survived for more than 5 minutes. And they wanted this child desperately. I told her parents she may never be normal, she might be blind, she might have seizures, she might never walk and talk, she might do all those things. I can't predict. And we prayed together, and her family decided to trust me and told me to make the decision for their child that I would make for mine. So once again, I was the buffalo. I went back, I operated on her. She arrested on the OR table twice, and I got her back. And hours later, she looked a little better, and then she started seizing. And then I could see through the dressing that her intestines were dying. And the neonatologists and the pediatricians and the neurosurgeons said to stop. But each time I went to that baby and put my hand in her bassinet, she kicked and she wiggled. And I prayed to God to help me make the decision, and I put my hand in there, and she wrapped her fingers around my pinky. And I said, okay, we fight. And so I asked her parents to give me one more try, and I took her back to the OR. And I took out the sick intestines, and I put on a temporary dressing, and I got the neurosurgeons to revise the shunt. And for the next 5 months, she struggled, and then she went home. She's 4 years old now. I went to her 4th birthday party last week. She walks. She doesn't talk, but she laughs. She understands what you say. She doesn't eat everything by mouth. She gets fed by a tube, but she sucks on lollipops and licks ice cream cones. And her parents love her and cherish every moment with her. I ask parents for permission to operate, and they have to trust me with the most precious thing they know. But I, too, am imperfect. Not only do I not always know how things will turn out, but I make mistakes, even on patients. I pray at the scrub sink, my Serenity Prayer, and for guidance from my thoughts and my hands as I take care of this little baby. I balance the bravado of knowing I've been trained to handle all the commonly described defects with the knowledge that each defect in child is different and not always predictable. I balance telling families that they have a chance with fear of failing them. And fortunately, God has been merciful. The number of lives I've saved well exceeds those I've lost. The ones who haunt me at night when I lay at the ceiling and asking God why he didn't guide me differently are balanced by the beautiful Christmas cards and photographs I get of smiling children who are thriving in the world. I celebrate knowing that I can make a difference. Sophia lived, and she lived through all the things that she went to, and her parents are so happy, and I love my job. I treasure the honor of caring for the smallest and the most broken of the world. You see, God uses imperfect perfectionism to make me a perfecter of the imperfect. What a gift. So as I leave you today, here are the key themes that I hope you'll take with you. Number one, who you are today does not define who you will be tomorrow, but what you learn, feel, and experience will shape you forever. I wasn't the popular student or the smartest student or the leader of students in this school. But here you will form the foundations that help you flourish into a wonderful person, whatever path you choose. Number two, it's okay to break the mold. Even if you were never elected to student government office in high school, you can be your class president. Even if women aren't welcome in surgery, you can become one of the best at the best training program in the country and have a successful year, and be married and have kids. Number three, be the buffalo. When hardship is heading your way, instead of running for it, confront it head on, get it over with, and look for the sunshine on the other end of the storm. And finally, know that imperfection is a gift. Use it as a tool for self-development and growth, not as a badge of shame or self-contempt. We are all imperfect in one way or another, on purpose, by God's design. Use it for good. Thank you for your time and attention. God bless and have a great day.